Welcome to the Reasons to Reason podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sal Galati. This is the show that's going to talk about all the things we're not supposed to: God, religion, and politics. So strap in, prepare to get offended, and maybe, just maybe, our nation can learn how to reason again. Long time no talk. I'm back. Sorry I was on a trip and had a lot of fun, but back into it. Got some ideas coming up. Today's episode I've been talking about for a while. I'm going to call it Experts, Modern Day False Prophets. Before I get started on that, though, I wanted to read a review, and please, on all the platforms that you're listening to the show, put a review, rate it, good or bad. I'm going to read a bad review because that's the one I'm most proud of that came up. So this is what the review said: anti-vax, anti-scientist, anti-democracy, anti-truth, right-wing, MAGA, fascist propaganda, masquerading as a dialogue, in quotation marks, on God and religion. So misguided and ultimately both wrong and damaging to our democracy and nation. So it's kind of timely because I'm going to talk about, the modern day experts and so-called experts and whoever this person is. I have an email address for the show, reasonstoreason@gmail.com. Please reach out. I'm happy to have a conversation with you that everyone could hear and enjoy. Actually, one of the reasons I started doing this is because I've been trying to get people to dialogue in public and they refuse to. And many people that have been very outspoken, vocal, and quite frankly, spreading lies about the things I've said over the years. I reached out to all of them. One of them responded and just saying that she wasn't interested, and that's fine, and that's great, and she was cordial. The others didn't, They got nothing to say. And that's the thing. That's why freedom of speech is so important. That's why not censoring voices had been happening, even though we were told it wasn't. It was just a, conspiracy theory. There's evidence it was happening. And this is why we need to just continue having these conversations and promote it. There's a podcast that Gavin Newsom just started, actually, and it's obvious he's running from some of the failed ideologies after the result of the presidential election. He's looking to moderate himself and clean himself up and present himself as a straight line, middle of the road type, and he's not. He's not anything really. He's just a product. He's a political animal. He'll say and do whatever he wants. But he's actually been interviewing. He had interviewed Charlie Kirk, Steve Bannon, who, if you look into Steve Bannon, it's really interesting to see what is said about these individuals. And it keeps people like our reviewer over here from actually listening to what they say. And another guy he's got on is Michael Savage. I'll actually talk a little bit about that interview. But I encourage you to listen to the Gavin Newsom podcast. Now, this guy's a master of dodging direct questions. He's fantastic. I actually applaud him. Very impressive, very political. This is what I'm trying to do with the show. So I've put the invites out there for people to come on, and it's reasonstoreason@gmail.com. Send me a note, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And I think it's entertaining. I think people want to hear it. So just let's go through this review very quickly. So anti-vax. Okay, obviously, Kennedy was being grilled about him being anti-vax. It's not about being anti-vax. It's about just asking questions. And Kennedy, said many, many times he's had his children vaccinated. He just has some questions. I think a lot of people have some questions. But to this reviewer, if you're not getting the COVID booster, at this time, which it's still recommended on the CDC website, are you anti-vax? I don't think there's a lot of people at this point that are healthy, middle-aged people that think there's any reason to continue getting these boosters, yet we're told we should. So, anti-scientists. I've stated many, many times, I love science. I think many of the people portraying to be science, which is why this episode's happening right now, is they're not scientists. They're political creatures masquerading as scientists, where they just change what they say, like Gavin Newsom. They don't base it on what the truth is. They base it on what the narrative is they're trying to sell. And we'll have examples of how you can make the science say whatever you want. Anti-democracy, again, we've had a democratic process here. We have a president, and we're watching how democracy works. I'm for democracy. I'm for straight elections. I'm for citizens-only voting and representing the will of the people. Anti-truth, okay, yeah. Right-wing, MAGA, right-wing, this right-wing thing, if you read the media, and we'll talk about the media too. I mean, again, this review is great because it's encapsulating all the areas I want to talk about. If you look at the media and who funds the media mostly, anytime there's talking about these political parties in Europe mainly that are very much about the same issues that our nations, the citizens at least, are upset about, mainly that we have open borders, we don't have sovereignty, the citizens are not being taken care of, and the citizens, by the way, not dependent on race. Nobody cares about that. Only leftists care about that. That's an issue to them. For everyone else, there's people that are citizens of this country, and the heart of the nation is we want to take care of our citizens, our veterans, our mentally ill, our abused, our victimized people. We want them to be taken care of. So, but there's a movement in Europe mainly saying, hey, we can't take people from all over the world anymore. There's crime, there's violence being perpetrated against our citizens. And is that right wing? It's not right wing, but whatever. It sounds, if you say right wing, it sounds extremist. There's no leftist view that's ever called left wing or alt left or whatever. It's always the basic common sense things are alt right, right. It's just all wordplay. Fascist. This is great. So the word fascist comes from fascist, and it means like a bundle of sticks. It's meant to invoke force. It's a totalitarian form of government. It's not necessarily on the left or the right, but any bad political ideology all throughout history, the people try to make it seem like it's on the right. Like Nazis, for example. The Nazis stand for the National Socialist German Workers' Party. That's who the Nazis were. Hitler was a socialist. But you'll never hear that. He's a right-winger. Why is he a right-winger? Because he hates Jews? Anyone I see in our country right now that's openly and adamantly anti-Israel or anti-Jewish people, it's on the left. Look at the universities. The scam has ran its course. But that's where fascist comes from. So you have a group called Antifa, which is promoting themselves as anti-fascist. What do they do? Burning, looting, intimidating, brutalizing. But it's just hypocrisy. And these are the people that supposedly care about the environment. Burning lithium batteries, burning Teslas. It's violence. Why? Because they don't have an argument to stand on. So again, free speech, no censorship. I'm for open debate. Like, for example, we have local elections coming up. I'm not going to even get into that because let it sort itself out. But it's hard to even know what these people are doing because we don't have a free press. We don't know what the political part, what each person on each side stands for. And there's some radical people that are running, people that views that are very unpopular in our country, but you never know it. You know, Trump gave a State of the Union or whatever they want to call it, address to Congress. What people don't understand about Trump is at heart, he's a unifier, and people are going to scoff and roll their eyes. He's a deal maker. He's a negotiator. What I see changing with him now is he realizes, and he vocalized it. He goes, there's nothing I can do to make, you know, he's addressing Congress. You have the Republicans on one side, which Republican, who cares, right? There's people that love this country and there's people that just love money and power. I'm not saying that's on only one side of the aisle, but for show, they're supportive. He went to the left, the Democrats, and said, there's nothing I can do that'll ever make you clap. And he proved it. I think there was a little bit of smattering of clapping when the suggestion of like Ukraine came up, meaning like you want to continue a war and people dying, which, you know, the media's not done a good job of presenting how many people are actually been killed over there. Look, there was that kid who was a cancer survivor. They gave him an honorary Secret Service designation or whatever, and that brought tears to my eye. But then like 2 minutes later, there was another kid that lost, I think his father was in law enforcement. He was killed in a line of duty, and he was looking to get into West Point. Trump acknowledged that he was accepted, and then that kid came, the cancer survivor kid was a black, I don't know, probably 8 to 10 years old, and the other kid was obviously 17, 18, to give him a high five. And what a beautiful moment. Look, this is what upsets me. All this racial division, it's all garbage. And people are getting wise to it. There's way more things to talk about. People aren't divided on race anymore. They're divided on being screwed over and the people taking advantage of them. And it's not, you know, Elon Musk because he's a billionaire. Elon Musk had many great ideas, and he's the Edison of our time. Do I agree with him on every single thing? No, I don't have to. But what he's doing is not an unpopular concept. There was a video of Obama from when he was president saying he was going to do the exact same thing. Clean out the corruption, clean out the waste, the fraud, the abuse. It's really shocking, but I would imagine a reviewer, because they've been propagandized, even though they say I'm spreading propaganda, doesn't understand that these things are very popular. So let's get into the meat of the show. So like, who are the modern day experts? And then we'll talk about what are false prophets. Like as always, I'm mixing some of the secular with some of the biblical. You know, I graduated from high school in 2001, and when I graduated, my dad said something that he noticed was class of 550 or so, vast majority going to four-year university, a lot going to 2-year, lot going to community college, a very few going into the military, very few going to vocational, like tens of kids in those areas. And he said when he was young, it was the other way around. Very, very few went to higher ed. The rest went into vocational. And I'm not saying what's the right ratio here or there, but I will definitely say there's been a push, and I think it's a big scam, to essentially send everyone has to go to higher education. Now, there's many jobs that require a 4-year degree that don't really require a 4-year degree, that require just some common sense, work ethic, and you could do it. Many white-collar jobs don't require a 4-year degree. I'm not using anything I learned in college, for example, in my work, but it requires a 4-year degree. So that said, what I think, I'm always kind of looking at like what's the nefarious intent. And it's not really that complicated when money is the gain or money is the goal. There's been an active push to get more and more people to send their kids to college because it's a big money-making operation. It wouldn't come to any surprise that the university system is kind of controlled by the left. So if you have all this money pouring into these institutions, mainly coming from middle-class people, mainly coming from people that got to take on debt, they become indentured servants to the system. Constantly, even if you get a 4-year degree, get a good job, you're paying off your debt till you're 40, 45 years old. You're not a free person. And for what? And then that money flows into these universities. Here's my observation. There's a lot of bright people, obviously, in the universities, and I would argue we had a lot more, it was a lot more quality 40, 50 years ago, but now it's just a lot of numbers. A lot of people, but not a lot of quality. And there's a lot of people and a lot of fake sciences that have been developed over the years to bring in mediocre people, give them a degree. And what I find these people are really good at is agitating the community. So they present themselves as experts because they go to such and such university or the professor such and such university. There's not really much for them to do. They write some papers that are nonsensical for the most part because it's not like 2 + 2 = 4 science. It's more just like, they're things that are unprovable. They're fields of study that are very feeling oriented, social emotional learning, gender studies, and all these things. This is how you get ideas like math is racist or being on time is racist. It's all coming from mediocre people that got nothing really of substance to talk about. So that's my observation. Now, I went to college and I was under the impression like these guys were smarter than my dad. My dad didn't go to college. My dad was an immigrant, hardworking guy, but he was very smart. I know that now. I knew that even then. I'm knowing it more and more now as the time goes on. You realize about a lot of these professors, they're just bullies. It's kind of easy to go toe-to-toe with a 18-year-old kid and lord over your degrees and years of study. Now, I respect the professors that go into the private sector, and then they come into the university to share and to glean. They probably take a pay cut to do so, but they like to teach. So we're going to go in specific then topics now of like these experts and what are they really experts or not. So let me introduce the idea of a false prophet. So false prophets are, what is a prophet? A prophet is someone who speaks on behalf of God, and God is truth. Let me read here. Prophet, source of info is God, and I put truth in parentheses. Whereas source of a false prophet is a false god, money and greed. We talked about that in other episodes. Jeremiah, for example, was not well received because he was warning of doom if they did not change course. The false prophet sold what the people wanted to hear. The people didn't want to hear the bad news. They wanted to hear just the good. So Jeremiah and Isaiah are an example of two very, very famous prophets, well revered now, but in their time they were persecuted. Isaiah ended up being killed. Sawn in two, by the way. Jeremiah was prisoned, beaten, and they were both warning Israel, change. God's telling them, change, or you're going to be uprooted. And the Babylonians eventually came. This is just history. The Babylonians came and did uproot them. They put them into exile. They were not well received in their time. They were sharing the truth. And we're going to make the comparison now of the people saying the truth, how they were treated versus the people that were saying things that were popular for the consolidation of money and power. Okay, are you following? So I've shared that political cartoon before, where it's an expert and a politician. Politicians saying trust the expert, trust the scientist, and behind their back they're handing the expert money. And that's often what goes on here in the scientific realm. Most of the science is funded by the government. And if the government's got an agenda, a preconceived decision or course they want to take, well, the science and the experts are going to support that narrative. And then when you have a conversation with your fellow citizen and they go to Google it, you're going to see all the, yes, propaganda. Like, for example, you Google what I was saying about fascist and Nazi and look at all these, it's rewriting history completely. well, Nazism was a socialist movement, but it really wasn't. It's always sugarcoating reality because the world is not interested in the truth. So do a little bit more Bible. Often false prophets were hired for payment or spoke their messages for financial gain. Here's from Micah. Her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and the prophets tell fortune for money. Yet they look for the Lord's support and say, is not the Lord among us? So here's a quick story, too, from the Old Testament. It's found in a book of Kings. And, I encourage you to read these books. I mean, you compare the books of the Bible, like Kings, which is a historical narrative, to what the archaeology actually presents. It's remarkable. But anyway, there's these, Israel's divided into two kingdoms, and you have the Jehoshaphat and Ahab looking to go into battle together. And the two kings are discussing, like, is this the Lord's will? And what's fun, Ahab's the bad king, and he's got his guys that he consoles that are supposedly prophets, but they're not. They essentially tell him whatever they want to hear. And Jehoshaphat goes, you got anybody else? Yeah, there's this other guy, but, he never tells me what I want to hear. That prophet comes and says that Ahab would be killed in battle and Israel would be scattered on the hills like sheep without a shepherd. And that is actually what came to pass. So he was actually the true prophet. But this idea is not new, that the leaders want to just have yes men around them. They don't want to have people telling them the truth. So this is the expert versus false prophet. So now we're going to get into some modern day examples of this happening, and I'm hoping you're following this. As far as like the anti-scientist thing, I love science. The political bureaucrats parading as scientists, like, look, all these institutions got too many political animals in them. We need scientists back in there. So I'm going to give you a little example that I came across. You guys ever heard of dihydrogen monoxide? Now, I'm sure the reviewer is going to be right on track with what I'm talking about. A kid did a science experiment, a high school kid, where he was talking about all the ills of the hydrogen monoxide and how it should be banned. And this is how he described it, amongst other things. It could corrode metal, cause severe burns, accidental ingestion can kill you. It's found in acid rain and tumors, and etc. So dihydrogen monoxide is another word for H2O, which we all know as water. And all those things are true about water, but it's a little not truthful. Yeah, you get it? And what essentially the science experiment was able to convince all his classmates but one to ban the substance, the one, being competent enough to know that that was H2O. So let's go into specific examples. So our favorite, let's do COVID first. So if everyone remembers accurately what happened, it was like we turned many things that we knew upside down for a period of time. And as I talk to people that are in medicine and are kind of coming along to, some of this stuff wasn't right, the common thread I hear is like, look, we lie to you for the best of the whole. So like for masks, for example, they knew the masks weren't effective, but if they helped a little bit and they caused people to be a little bit more careful, then it was ultimately good. Lying is good if the result is good. No, lying's never good. So Fauci came out in the beginning saying, no, masks weren't effective unless you're in a hospital setting. Then it became, you had to wear a mask or you're an asshole. So that's an example of, are these people experts or are they just saying what they need to be said? They wanted to create a sense of fear. They wanted to keep people paralyzed. What the true agenda of all that is, I'm not going to even get into, but we know now that maybe it wasn't true. Models, they use scientific models, very complicated, so complicated. And we'll talk about models when it comes to climate too. The models were way off. The models make assumptions that weren't accurate. And the sinister element of this pandemic was that they convinced people that even if they didn't have symptoms, they were like, they shouldn't go outside because they could kill people. And I asked a friend once, I said, how do you even set up the experiment to know how contagious someone is who doesn't have symptoms? Can you give me the study? Because that essentially was like, you couldn't even argue against it. If you could spread without having any symptoms, then what? No one could leave their house ever, right? It was like this beautiful argument that they had that kept people in their house. And they rely on the goodness of the American people, right? So he sent me a study, and I don't know if you read it, but then you read the abstract and you read the methodology. It wasn't a study at all. All it was a computer model where they put in variables, different coefficients, spreadability based on symptoms, not symptoms, this, that, and they just ran a computer game. But if the variables are all off, and the variables, no one even knows what the variables are, you essentially are producing the result that you want. You get it? Similar to climate. So climate, there's a guy his name's Steve Koonin. He wrote a book, Unsettled, and he was Obama's climate czar. And his book essentially talks a lot about how, like, even though they know what if they got the model and then they know what the climate did the last 10 years, they can't make the model produce that. So even knowing what the climate was, they can't predict the past, essentially, which just shows you the model's all garbage. Back to the and I encourage you to listen to the Gavin Newsom podcast. Michael Savage has been a guy I've listened to for a long time. Here, another guy, if you Google him, he's a this, he's a that. He's an anti-Semite, he's a Nazi, even though he's a Brooklyn Jew. It's just, it's all the same stuff. And no one's afraid of being called these things anymore. They've lost their meanings tragically because there are actually anti-Semites that don't get called out. But that aside, he brings up this study that was done in an Antarctic lake called Lake Vostok. And in it, they could pull up ice cores and see the various things about our past. And one thing that they see is that there is a correlation between global temperature, and this is all prior to the Industrial Revolution, prior to the burning of fossil fuels. There's a relation between CO2 and temperature, but it's not the relation that the scientists, want to tell you. CO2 goes up, and then the temperature goes up. In fact, what the ice cores show is that the Earth has a natural warming and cooling period. I would argue a lot of it has to do with the sun, that no one wants to talk about, which is ironic. The heat source for the planet, no one wants to talk about the cycles that the sun goes through. But regardless, we don't want to get too scientific and upset anybody. That the temperature goes up and then the CO2 follows. We don't have to go into details as explanations for that, but that's the relation. It's not the CO2 goes up and the temperature follows. There's been hotter times in our history, hotter times prior to the Industrial Revolution. There's been times with more CO2 in our atmosphere prior to the Industrial Revolution. So these all go against the narrative that we got to stop burning fossil fuels. So, and again, I love the environment. I want clean air, clean water. I want poison out of our food, poison out of our soil. But we also need clean, affordable energy. And we've talked about some, like in that EPA episode, I talked with Donna. There's some things that just don't make any sense if the end goal is to really be taking care of the environment. So some real quick false prophecies. James Modge, he's scientist for National Center of Atmospheric Research, said in 1970 we would have an ice age by 2000 because of air pollution. In 1971, Dr. S.I. Rasool from NASA in Columbia said there would be an ice age by 2020. Paul Ulrich, Stanford, said in 1967 we would have famines by 1975, and it was unavoidable. He suggested putting sterilizing agents into food and water. I wonder if he also implied for him and his family. Jim Hansen, Columbia University, predicted New York City West Side Highway would be underwater by 2019. Prince Charles, of very intelligent stock, only 8 years to save the planet. That was in July of 2009. In 2009, Al Gore also cited a model at the UN Climate Conference that all ice would be gone by 2014. And finally, we have AOC, obviously expert extraordinaire in all areas. In 2019, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. That was her quote. Obviously, the jury's still out on that. We got some time to go. We got another 6 years. And I guess if the planet ends because of global warming in 6 years, she would be a true prophet. At this point, I'm putting her as a false prophet. What they don't tell you about these climate models, like the COVID models, they want to make it seem like it's this big, sophisticated Wizard of Oz thing that no idiot can figure out. It's really just a bunch of assumptions, and the models mean nothing. Now, let's talk misinformation, disinformation, just to get everyone on the same page here. Trump colluded with Russia. Was that true? Everyone told me it was true. I was an idiot for saying it wasn't true. Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. Was that his laptop or not? It was his laptop. And you had an election based on people that had access to intelligence that the citizens didn't have, telling you, oh, no, it's not. It's Russian disinfo. Are we getting any pictures of the dead bodies in Russia and Ukraine? Millions probably dead there. And all we can do is put flags in our yard and act like we're heroes. We were told that Russia blew up their own pipeline to Europe, Nord Stream 2. And if you suggested that that wasn't the case and maybe we had some involvement in it, you were called a conspiracy theorist. Even though Biden on record beforehand, he probably didn't even know what he was talking about, but said that we could shut that down if we wanted to and was very vague about it. Yeah, we shut it down, certainly. Why would Russia destroy their own pipeline, which was giving them money? And as Trump pointed out some time ago, if Europe was so concerned of the existential threat of Russia invading all of Europe, which that's not their mission or goal. That doesn't mean Russia's justified in everything they do, but that's not their goal. Then why did they spend more money on Russian energy than defending Ukraine? Because it's a bunch of crap. COVID had man-made origins from the Wuhan lab and was funded by U.S. funds. That was all crazy conspiracy theory, all but true. All proven true. USAID money has been shown to go to media outlets like Political, etc. Pravda. Pravda was the state-run media in Russia. Pravda means truth. And what people don't know is we have our own form of Pravda here. Overtly, NPR and PBS are government-funded. How could they be holding the government accountable? How are they going to be pointing out waste, fraud, and abuse and money going to places it shouldn't be? The nation shouldn't be the government shouldn't be funding the media. How can you get a free press that way? It's state-run media. It's Pravda. It's very Soviet. I was actually talking to a friend who's, Trump's upending this, Trump's ruining that. I told him he's de-Sovieting our government, and he got up in arms because he's from the former Soviet Union, that it's nothing like the Soviet Union. Look, it's not all the way there, but it's a lot like it. We got state-run media, we got bureaucracies, we got unelected people making a ton of decisions, and they're never held accountable. This is not the way it was supposed to be. We're supposed to have people that are held accountable, not people that get to sit there for no matter who the president is, no matter who the people vote for, no matter what the will of the people are, continuing to enact an agenda that's against the best interest of most people. So economics. I was told that the inflation was transitory. Remember that? Transitory. And a lot of these things, too, if you were to talk to just a grandmother or a grandfather with no college education and threw these at them, they'd be so quick to say that's a bunch of crap. And again, not to say that there's not value in getting expertise in particular fields, but it was obvious with the money that we printed that inflation was coming down the pipe and it was to stay. It wasn't transitory. I mean, they make up these words, and then they started, when transitory didn't work, they blamed it on the war. They blamed it on this. They blamed it on that. Inflation is coming because we're printing currency. We're actually going to go into a concept called modern monetary theory. So modern monetary theory, MMT, is a macroeconomic supposition that asserts that monetarily sovereign countries such as the US, UK, Japan, and Canada, which spend, tax, and borrow in a fiat currency that they fully control, are not operationally constrained by the revenues when it comes to federal government spending. Put simply, modern monetary theory decrees that such governments do not rely on taxes or borrowing for spending, since they could print as much money as they need and are monopoly issuers of the currency. Since their budgets aren't like a regular household's, their policy should not be shaped by fears of a rising national debt. So I like for you to note that Bernie Sanders and AOC are believers of this religion. Again, this is the danger of the expert. These are people, and I'm assure you, the people that came up with this ideas in the university level never actually worked in the private sector, creating a product or a service that anyone would ever want to pay for. They don't understand business. They don't understand economics. They're children when it comes to this. Of course, if you keep printing money, the value of the money is going to go down. So it's just the dangers of these ideas, these childish ideas, okay? And they're not experts. Just because they have a degree does not make them an expert. An expert is someone who runs a household, who understands that you cannot just continue to spend money you don't have. It breaks you. And it's breaking our nation too. This is the turbulence. The turbulence is that this administration is deciding to do something about it, which involves some very, very hard decisions. You got to break the cycle, and they're in the process of doing that. And I think it's for short-term pain, for very much long-term gain. What we're doing now is unsustainable. Anyone with common sense knows that. You can't just spend money endlessly like modern monetary theory projects, and rely on an AOC or Bernie Sanders, who, again, never worked for a dollar producing anything of value. This all is going to summarize, and I obviously got to bring it back to the Bible. Let me read a little bit from Matthew 23. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, so do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be seen by others. So here's Jesus going against the modern day experts of his time. Really, it's not the religion of the Bible, because there's no such thing as a religion of the Bible. It's a religion of man that the Pharisees created. And he's pointing out something. They got all these things that they tell you to do, but are they doing them themselves? And, I can't help but think when it comes to the COVID people that were telling you what to do, were they doing it in their own lives? No, it's good for you. We're telling you, so to keep you guys in check, we're going to do what we do because we know the truth. When it comes to the climate and the environment, are the people burning Teslas really care about the environment? If you're not going to call that out Mr. and Mrs. Environmentalist as wrong, then you're complicit in it. If someone that is on my side of the fence politically does something immoral, I'm going to call it out. It's immoral. Doesn't matter if their politics align with me or not. So Jesus went against the experts of his time, and he beat them with truth, right? Free speech. Let's keep talking. Let's keep sharing ideas. Let's not trust the experts. An expert who's wrong over and over and over again is not an expert unless they're just self-proclaimed experts. Moses had a way of determining whether or not a prophet was real. And he said, if their prophecies don't come to pass, they're not a prophet. If these people don't have anything of value to tell you and help you plan your lives and make decisions for your well-being, which is their job, they should share the information, the truth, not tell you what they think you need to hear in order to do the action that they want you to do. Tell us the truth, treat us like Americans, and everything will work out. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode. I hope I got you thinking and out of your comfort zone. Believe me, the biggest fear your government has is a population that is thinking and talking to one another. So get out there, take a risk, start a conversation, make a friend, and reason with each other. Share the show with someone who you think needs to hear it. I wish you peace and love.